Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, one of the most popular shopping apps in the U.S., Temu, is in hot water. House lawmakers request an FBI briefing on the Chinese company over safety concerns about American data. New York City Mayor Eric Adams charged with accepting illegal donations from a foreign government, Turkey, while his interactions with China also come under scrutiny. New developments in the high-stakes case of Linda's son, a former top aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, charged with working under Beijing's instructions. NTD was in the courtroom, what we learned from her latest appearance. And U.S. lawmakers say the Chinese Communist Party is an unprecedented threat. How strong are U.S. policies designed to counter it? A closer look.
It has happened right here in the United States, and it's happened in other Western governments, where someone is literally kidnapped from the street and then taken to China.
Lawmakers on the House Intelligence Committee zeroing in on one of America's most popular shopping apps, Temu. Congressmen, including the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, requested a briefing from the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission on Wednesday, following a New York Post report saying Temu's parent company is allegedly led by former officials from the Chinese Communist Party. Lawmakers said they are concerned about data on American users. Temu's parent company is called PDD Holdings, an online retailer based in China. It's also listed on the NASDAQ. The Post reports that a dozen of the company's top leadership are former CCP officials. For example, one of its vice presidents is a former official from China's State Administration for Market Regulation. Another VP, a former official from the Shanghai Administration for Industry and Commerce. Two legal directors were former judges in Shanghai. States have also sounded the alarm over Temu. Arkansas sued Temu and its Chinese parent company in June. The state's attorney general alleged that Temu is malware disguised as an e-commerce platform. The lawsuit said the app is designed to gain unfettered access to a user's phone by overriding data privacy settings. As for what kinds of data it collects, fingerprints, location data, text messages, contacts, camera access, and documents. The lawsuit accuses Temu of selling this data to third parties to make money. Temu denies the allegations, saying they are totally unfounded. Despite that, Temu remains in hot water. Congress is investigating the app over data security concerns, while the state of Montana banned both Temu and Chinese-owned TikTok from government devices, citing threats to user security. Last year, Apple suspended Temu from the Apple App Store for misrepresenting the type of user data it's capable of collecting. Apple later lifted the restriction. Google suspended parent company PDD's app in the same year because it contained malware. New York City Mayor Eric Adams charged on Thursday with accepting illegal donations from a foreign country. On top of that, U.S. authorities are separately looking into his alleged interactions with countries like China. U.S. prosecutors charged Adams with accepting illegal campaign contributions and luxury travel from Turkish nationals seeking to influence him. According to The Times, authorities also sought information on his interactions with Israel, China, Qatar, South Korea, and Uzbekistan. And looking back to earlier this year, federal agents searched the homes of Winnie Greco, a top advisor to Adams for a decade. She was his director of Asian affairs. A New York Post report said Greco's company received an unknown amount of money from the propaganda department of a Chinese Communist Party agency in 2019. She's also been active in events organized by an influence group that's led by the CCP. Next, the latest update on a former senior government employee charged with working for China. Linda's son, a former top aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, along with her husband, co-defendant Chris Hu, appeared in court for a status conference Wednesday afternoon. NTD's Flora Hua was there in the courtroom.
Both dressed in dark suits, Linda's son and her husband, Chris Hu, hugged their attorneys inside the court. They had a few requests to make in front of the judge later that day. But little did they know, both major requests would be denied. The pair was charged with multiple criminal counts weeks ago. Linda Sun being accused of acting as an unregistered foreign agent for Beijing, particularly in her former state positions. And her husband was allegedly involved in money laundering and fraud crimes. Sun was released under the condition that she have no contact with the Chinese consulate whatsoever. And here comes the first request from her attorney to allow Sun to have, quote, unplanned and uncoordinated conversations with people from Chinese consulate and mission, citing high risks of unknowingly running into Chinese consulate individuals in her community. Judge Kogan refused to sign the billing modification. He suggested that the wordings needed to be tighter, as no one can guarantee that the conversations will be unplanned in a party. Second, regarding the request to classify Hu's case as not complex in order to expedite the proceedings, Judge Kogan said the case involves multiple international entities and a foreign country, China. He believes the case is already complex, as long as Hu and Sun are both involved. In recent years, the Department of Justice has charged an increasing number of cases linked to espionage or foreign agents of the Chinese Communist Party or the CCP. Many of those have been convicted or have pleaded guilty.
This kind of blatant, arrogant activity and crime by the Communist Party has already awakened the United States, and they have started to seriously investigate it. More CCP agents and spies will be caught, and more CCP proxies will be arrested. Even many Westerners who have been bought by the CCP will also be removed and arrested.
Back to the courtroom. In the end, U.S. prosecutors disclosed that they're pursuing another count against Hu, potentially amplifying the financial crime charges against him. Flora Hua, NTD News.
To dive deeper into Beijing's spying efforts here on American soil, Steve Lands with NTD's Capitol Report spoke with Congressman James Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Here's what he had to say.
Your committee, the House Oversight Committee, yesterday held its third hearing of its kind into the political warfare of the Chinese Communist Party. Talk to us about where you're at now in the committee and why this issue is so critical.
Because we've determined that the federal government doesn't even know how to identify a threat from the Chinese Communist Party, much less have a plan to alleviate that threat. So what we've got to do is figure out a way to educate different department heads and division heads in the federal government as to what a potential threat from China looks like, and then have a plan on how to prevent that from happening. I know we see, well, China may have hacked into a software system, and that's a problem. We have old, outdated, obsolete computer software systems in the federal government. But we also have an issue where there are Chinese nationals that are infiltrating agencies as employees. We believe that this is part of a huge spy ring that involves stealing our intellectual property, stealing our patents. We know this is going on in the universities, but from our standpoint on the Oversight Committee, we're concerned about the federal government. And what we want to do, regardless of who president is to try to create a system to where the employees are educated to know what to look for and then how to prevent it, because China is infiltrating our government, they're infiltrating our political system, and they're doing it in front of our eyes, and I don't think a lot of people realize it.
There's a term for this. It's called elite capture.
Absolutely.
So
That's
it's
their
intentional.
strategy. Very good. I appreciate your knowledge of the issue.
With that said, you touched upon Chinese hacking. You may recall Volt Typhoon, where they planted malware in different parts of our, infrastructure and utility systems to just be turned at the snap of a finger. Oftentimes, you'll hear folks even on Capitol Hill referring to China as a competitor. Right. That type of act doesn't strike me as competition, right, but almost as an act of war.
I think 10 years ago we looked at China as an up-and-coming competitor. Now we look at them as a threat. Not just a threat in business and a threat in manufacturing, but a threat to our national security. So much of our technology is dependent on China or Taiwan, which, at any minute could become part of China if something happened on that Taiwan border, like what's happened on the Ukrainian border with Russia. So we've got to understand the national security risk that China poses in our technology front, in our food supply, and that's why I think we need to get serious about China buying farmland. China not just buying farmland, and I'm a farmer, I understand this, but buying food processors, buying huge interest into some of our food processing facilities. The technology issue and our pharmaceutical issue as well. A lot of our most important pharmaceuticals in America are manufactured in China, and I think that's a concern. So you got pharmaceutical threat, you got a technology threat, and you got a food supply threat from China. We better be taking them seriously. I think in the business community, most people are. Maybe in Congress, people realize it's a threat, but I will tell you where they do not realize it, and that's what our committee hearings are about. The federal government, the employees, the division heads, the rank and file federal government employee doesn't even think about China, much less know how to identify a threat and prevent it from happening.
House Oversight Chair James Comer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Experts gathered in Washington, D.C. to assess how strong U.S. policies are in countering the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Moolenaar has more on the China panel, hosted by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation on Wednesday.
The Chinese Communist Party is an unprecedented threat, lawmakers say, and standing up to that threat could mean relinquishing practical interests.
When you think of the challenge we faced with the Soviet Union, our economies were not intertwined nearly to the degree that we are with China. One area I'm very concerned about in my district is there's a Chinese battery company that partners with Volkswagen, and they're trying to make batteries in the United States, and our state government is subsidizing it. They're going to try and get federal tax credits, dollars from taxpayers in America, and there are direct links to forced labor in Xinjiang.
President Biden signed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act 3 years ago, but the Chinese regime has found ways to skirt the law. Panelists call for strengthening laws on forced labor.
Increased fines for importers, particularly those who are repeat violators of UFLPA, so that they're facing actual financial consequences.
And panelists say if the U.S. strengthens and further enforces its laws, it could play a significant role.
Is actually a really important strategy and can have some very interesting and even unexpected outcomes, in my opinion. If we're hearing some of the insights about the internal weaknesses and paranoia and the discontent with Xi Jinping's regime.
Another challenge is to crack down on the CCP's intimidation of the Chinese diaspora in the U.S.
It has happened right here in the United States, and it's happened in other Western governments, where someone is literally kidnapped from the street and then taken to China.
The real victims of the CCP are the Chinese people. If they have relatives back in China, oftentimes they're being coerced into trying to do things illegal, and the coercion or source of leverage are their relatives back home.
This transnational repression is carried out not only through the so-called Chinese police stations, but also in a more underground fashion, which appears non-threatening, that is, in our universities.
They've tried to do is subtly and not so subtly change the way people think about China and have people think about China in positive ways.
Has the issue been resolved?
No.
That's what I mean. A lot of these places,
they've quit calling themselves Confucius Institutes. In most places, they now call themselves cultural centers and other kinds of things.
To further pressure the CCP and expose its malign acts, Congress this evening passed a bill to sanction CCP officials directly. Now it's headed over to the Senate, joining several other CCP-related measures recently passed in the House, including the Falun Gong Protection Act, a measure meant to stand against the regime's systematic persecution of spiritual adherents, who are still among the most persecuted groups inside of China today. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
How does the Chinese regime plan to dominate key industries? And could their telecommunication systems like Huawei act as a Trojan horse to cause devastation in the United States at the flip of a switch? Steve Lance with NTD's Capitol Report spoke with Congressman John Moolenaar, chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, for insight.
Congressman, thank you for taking a moment. Congressman, talk to us about how the Chinese Communist Party exerts its influence into our key industries in the United States.
Well, they have a very strategic plan on dominating different key industries, and what they do is typically they pick a national champion in China. They heavily subsidize that champion and find ways to destroy the competition through unfair trade practices. And it could involve stealing technology, subsidies, dumping, overcapacity, and so that's something we've seen them do in different industries, and they're targeting key areas that they believe they can be dominant in.
You've spoken about, the human nature aspect of saying, show me the smoking gun. Talk to us about why that doesn't apply to this particular instance.
Well, I think we have to start with the understanding that Chinese businesses are all part and beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. So there is not truly a private sector that is separate from the Chinese Communist Party. And when you consider that their national security laws require accountability and subservience to the Chinese Communist Party, it just is a very different structure for business, and it's something we need to be mindful of.
Talk to us, if you could, about Huawei, the telecom giant, and the rip and replace that you talked about, the expenses that it's caused the American people, and also with regard to what we saw happen with Hezbollah in Israel, how essentially Huawei could be a Trojan horse in a certain sense.
Well, in the area of telecommunications, the Chinese picked Huawei as their national champion, and we're very successful around the globe. And now we're in the process of the rip and replace, trying to get that technology out of our systems and making sure we don't have those vulnerable. When it comes to electronics, the level of sophistication, the ability to whether it's hacking or different types of cyber threats, there are tremendous vulnerabilities, and we need to be mindful of that, whether it's our military, our infrastructure, everyday communications of Americans. We know that China has a strong surveillance program, where they monitor what's happening in their country, but they're also exporting that surveillance system around the globe. And it empowers autocratic leaders. And so for some countries, it's an attractive thing, and they're becoming more dependent on the CCP.
Coming up, China launched an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean. It marks Beijing's first such test in more than 4 decades.
This is a significant test because it's muscle flexing. It's an exercise in nuclear coercion.
Vietnam's leader visits the U.S. to meet with President Biden. How the nation, one of China's neighbors, ties into the U.S.-China rivalry. And Russia and China conduct joint naval exercises. It's the second drill the two countries have staged within a month. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China launched an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean earlier this week. It marked Beijing's first such test in 4 decades. The missile carried a dummy warhead, but these types of missiles are designed to carry nuclear warheads and can hit targets across continents. And these types of missiles could have the range to reach California if launched from a submarine. Evan Lee with NTD's Good Morning Show spoke to Bradley Thayer for his perspective. He's a founding member of the Committee on President-Danger China and co-author of Understanding the China Threat.
This is a significant test because it's muscle flexing. It's an exercise in nuclear coercion where the Chinese regime is attempting to signal to the rest of the world, but of course specifically to the United States and its key allies, Japan, Australia, and partners like Taiwan and India, that it is the dominant state, that it is essentially attempting to establish the rules of the road for the Indo-Pacific area and indeed globally. So the test is very significant because of the fact that it hasn't been done since 1980 in terms of this launch vector from, it appears, Hainan Island into the South Pacific. So it shows that the Chinese regime is taking the steps that it deems necessary to show the United States that it's going to continue its policy of hyperaggression in international politics, whether that's against the Philippines or whether that's against Taiwan or Japan or the United States itself. So it's a worrisome development.
Responding to China's missile launch, Taiwan voiced what it called solemn condemnation on Thursday. The same day, Taiwan's defense ministry reported a new surge of Chinese military activity around the island. The U.S. and the Philippines have repeatedly condemned China's increasingly assertive actions in the South China Sea. And on Wednesday, the Philippines said its Fisheries Bureau aircraft was shadowed by a Chinese Navy helicopter while on patrol near the Scarborough Shoal. The Philippines considers the shoal part of its maritime territory. Beijing also lays claim to it, but that claim is part of a broader one covering most of the South China Sea. An international court rejected China's claim in 2016. President Joe Biden met with Vietnam's President Ho Lam in the U.S. on Wednesday. Biden sought to elevate U.S. relations with Vietnam to a strategic partnership to counter Vietnam's ties with China and Russia.
First of all, we made historic investments in semiconductors and supply chains. Second, we launched unprecedented cooperation on cybersecurity. And third, we stood united, building a more open and secure Indian Ocean, committed to freedom of navigation and the rule of law.
The U.S. and China are vying for influence in Vietnam. Alexander Vu Vinh is a Vietnam expert at a Hawaii-based U.S. Defense Department institute, said that the meeting shows Vietnam's effort to balance relations with major powers, especially after the Vietnamese leader's recent visits to China and meetings with Russian President Putin. Some U.S. labor groups say that Vietnam is increasingly becoming a manufacturing hub for Chinese firms to evade U.S. import restrictions. Russia and China are in the midst of joint naval exercises in the Western Pacific. That's the message from the Russian Defense Ministry on Thursday. NTD Taiwan correspondent Joy Chiu has more on what the drills entail.
The drills in the Sea of Okhotsk are part of the naval exercise called Beibul Interaction 2024. Russia and Chinese navies are practicing with anti-aircraft and anti-submarine weapons. The drill started over the weekend. It's the second joint drill between the two countries within the month.
We watch all.
The U.S. and its allies have been watching drills from both countries with growing concern. They have accused China of aiding Russia in weaponry in the war against Ukraine. Beijing denied the allegation. For decades, Russia and China have been strengthening their military cooperation, with their first joint drill conducted in 2003. Both Russia and China believe that the West is suppressing their interest. Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed concern about NATO's expansion, while China asserted its claims over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Joy Chu, NTD News, Taiwan.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.